as you mentioned, that correct me if I'm wrong, the whole system behind it, the way you saw it, was that it was very uncaring, uncompassionate, and more concerned with people not going to jail over nursing the families themselves, nurturing the families themselves, with this really bad culture within the system. And you mentioned, which when I watched the Mel Clark interview, you had this very stark image in my head when I heard this about the midwife that was crying in the cupboard about this whole, about everything that was going on. It just seems that everything from there being the university teaching, and this goes all across many other things as well, where you have all these protests going on in universities for causes that when you ask the students there that are protesting, they can't tell you why they're protesting or what it's for, really. They had this trumped up, vague cause that they've been told to go out and hold flags and a lot of times commit acts of terror for. But with this, you don't really hear too much about it coming from this side. But it's so important, especially when you're talking about bringing young children into the world, that this is where the focus is. I'm just trying to think, how does... And it just, for somebody like me, it's just like the people going into this field, you would think it's because they want to take care of these people that are going through this very pivotal point in their lives of bringing a new life into the world. How did the system of values get so turned upside down, do you think?
I don't believe any of the students that I trained with or any of the midwives that I worked with go to work to be to not give good care. Now, that I never saw any midwife deliver care. I'm trying to get this right. I didn't ever see a midwife just deliberately be mean to somebody. I never saw anyone hitting anybody, or it's the systematic structure that it doesn't enable you to be the midwife that you want to be. So, for instance, you've got 20 women being induced and you haven't spoken to any of them. To the women I've been neglected by a midwife, to the midwife, that's normal.
Mm.
So you've got this real psyops on both sides. It's really hard to crumble it down, because you've got a midwife saying, well, I did great care because nobody died and everybody's all right. But actually, have you sat down and nurtured anybody? Have you sat down and do you know their name? Do you know their partner's name? Do you know their children's names? Do you know where they live? No, most of your patients, you don't even know where they live, because all you do is you look at a name and it's on the computer. So it's that bit that's the crap bit about the reality of midwifery, is that you don't go to give bad care, but to the women, they're having terrible care. So the midwives will say, and I will say, I always gave great care. But actually, when I think about it in reality, women might say, you didn't look after me right, because how can I? I didn't get to sit down and say, George, what makes you tick? What can I do to make you feel safe, nurtured, heard? And if you said to me, Victoria, I'm really insecure and I need you to check on me every hour, and I didn't do that, that's bad care.
Mm.
So it's it's both sides, isn't it? It's this, I'm delivering midwifery care in line with the policy, the code of practice and all of the X, Y, and Z, but the system's so overrun and so broken and so underfunded and so short-staffed that you're not then delivering the care that is needed. So you're inadvertently breaching your code and you're inadvertently causing negligence. So I think midwives, when they hear me say this, they're like, oh, how could you say that about us? I don't go to work to harm. I don't go to work to harm. But I tell you what I did do, George. I wrote to the NMC and I wrote these very words. I inadvertently breached my code of conduct every single day. People were like, don't write that. Why? It's the truth. Take back my pin. I inadvertently breached my code because I couldn't deliver X, Y, and Z of safety, communication, courage, commitment. I couldn't do it all. I'm really sorry. But also, as a governing body, you've allowed people to call me a baby killer online, and you haven't supported me. Why do I want to be on your, why would I want to be anywhere near you? So for me, it's not as easy to say you deliver bad care. I might have delivered poor care because the system didn't allow me to deliver the care that I wanted to give. So, for instance, if you wanted a home birth and you couldn't have it, you're going to be absolutely devastated, and that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life, right? I didn't get my home birth. You had a choice, though. You could have just had a home birth and had a doula or free birthed. People will be horrified I've said that. But that is the reality of where we're getting to. Like, people have to start making their own choices, because the minute you cross that door into that hospital, you're handing over your informed consent and you're handing over your whole consent. Where are your rights? So, yeah, it's a big topic. I mean, we could talk about this for years.
Absolutely. And there's so many other things, especially from that call we had initially as well. There's so much stuff that's going on seemingly behind the scenes, such as what you mentioned, they're covering up, baby deaths and stuff like that. All of this stuff the managers are making. I got a quote by here. Where is it? So you said here, usually 8 to 10 on a shift. And this goes back to the understaffing problem you mentioned, but routinely it was about 1 to 2 people. So again, you had this gigantic list of names that people you had to take care of. And then, as you mentioned, however many names you've got on this list, you've got no chance of being able to do all your rounds consistently and be able to sit down with them for conversation, whatever it might be. And the managers or somebody, I don't want to say it was like a particular manager or anything like that, but you were quoted in saying the response basically was, is that a you problem or ours? That was the response that you were given, I believe. And it just goes to speak again to this awful culture that seems to be at the heart of really all public institutions that I'm seeing, in my opinion. It seems to be at the heart of like the school system that seem to be more and more just, left-wing indoctrination factories, in my opinion. But just how bad are we talking when it comes to like the managerial oversight and this thing where you mentioned like the scale and the time frame of like covering up baby deaths and stuff like that? How does it get that bad?
Well, I've never known them to cover up baby deaths in my hospital. So when I left, I took my localized issues and I started breaking them down. So I started looking at the management structure, what's happening with the union, what's happening with all of this. Now, all I know is that when I reported an incident internally, which is on our datexing system, which is in majority of the hospitals, I datex something as a serious incident. Now, that I'm allowed to have a clinical judgment because I am a registrant. I have a registration 17D 0059E. That was my number. Okay. I, under that number, have a lawful and legal obligation to make my clinical judgment of a situation based on what I know in my experience and what is going on in the environment around me. I don't believe anybody should downgrade that based on their judgment when they were not there. So after a serious incident where a lady laboured for 10.5 hours on her own in triage behind a curtain and had absolutely no care and had very brief care before her baby was born, severely compromised and had neonatal resuscitation and went to intensive care at the baby unit, I put that as a serious incident because of staffing, and it was downgraded to a mild, which meant it was a desktop review and it went in a top drawer. So how can I work with these managers? How can I work with these people? I cannot work in that environment and never will do. So when you're starting to talk about your own managers, I then think, well, who was agreeing that I know this midwife, she's a good-hearted person, but she's doing what she's told in line of her box, her policy. And then the next manager does her box, and the next manager does her box. Whereas you mentioned there about what left wing and right wing. I'm not either. So I didn't see any cover up of baby deaths in the hospital that I was in. Okay. So when I left, I saw this as a localized problem. I was trying to, how can I make change in the Plymouth area? And I thought, right, I've got the power, I've got the knowledge, I've got the tenacity, I've got the carbon, footballs, I'll go do it. And it was pretty horrific, the experience that came after that, obviously, because you then know that I was threatened. So when I left, the day before I left and handed my notice in on the Tuesday, the 8th of February, on the 7th of February, I was at work and a lady laboured behind a curtain for 10 hours. We only had 2 members of staff on shift, 3 and then 4 to support as the day went on. But it was so busy. And I had more than one patient all day. So I actually day text that this lady had laboured behind a curtain. She had a baby with a very poor outcome who went to NICU after resuscitation and at staffing levels. That day text was downgraded to a mild from a serious. So I've struggled with that more because it's denying the woman the truth about the systemic failings, which is why it escalates, because women then have to go through legal to get their answers, to get their voice heard. And it just creates this vortex of trauma, and it makes it worse, and it makes women more angry. So I just wish some of my colleagues would actually grab their bollocks and just say, no, I'm telling the woman what happened. What's the worst it's going to do? It's doing damage anyway. So I'm disappointed that my colleagues sometimes just go in this box, and go, right, I can only do this bit of my job, and then I can only do this bit of my job. And I'm going to say this, there's no way on earth that I signed an oath to ever not bring the trust into disrepute against patient safety. It was never a sentence. So I don't care whether they're, this big entity. I will never, ever do that. And it just wouldn't happen naturally because I'm not like that. But I think what's really important to highlight here is that midwives actually don't agree with a lot of what I'm saying because they're in the system. They're wrapped up in, there's a bit of ego that comes from being a midwife. Like when people say, what do you do? I always used to look for their reaction when I said, I'm a midwife. They go, oh, I love it. Oh my God. And they want to tell you all about their birth, and they want to tell you all about their problems that they've had after birth, or that years ago it was it's wonderful because women just want to tell each other everything. So that point in a woman's life is enormous, and it can have an impact on her whole life. So to tell people you're a midwife is a wonderful thing. I don't have that same feeling anymore. It actually feels toxic to me. So there is an element of ego in it, I think, for a lot of people, unhealed trauma, like, oh, look at me, I'm a midwife. But really ask yourself, are you a midwife? If you ask the Highland midwife if she's a midwife, or the Welsh community midwife who sits in a clinic and just looks after women and gets left alone, if they're a midwife, they might say yes. But really, really, truly, the essence of a midwife is this what we are. So what I will say on the baby death cover-up is that I do know there are midwives, because now obviously I'm very outspoken and people come to me. I've had a lot of messages recently from very high up midwives in trusts saying to me, I see you, well done, people are watching, thank you for leading the way. I've had someone say, I want to whistleblow, but I'm scared. And I don't tell them to do it. I just say, when you're ready, you'll make your choice. So people are coming, but I do know that midwives have told the BBC and Sky that they're covering up baby deaths in a hospital somewhere around England.
And
they've
in
never
an undisclosed location.
Undisclosed. And they have never, ever published that. They've never, ever put it out there. And that came from a midwife that worked there.